Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for the first part of our Finding Your CEO webinar series. My name is Kirsten Loita, and I'm a partner here at Osage University Partners, leading our university relations efforts. We'll go to the next slide. I'm joined today by one of my colleagues, Marc Singer. Marc, could you introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Marc Singer. I'm a managing partner and a co-founder of OUP. I focus on technology investments, which includes hardware companies, software companies, and climate tech opportunities. I've been in the venture capital world for over 30 years at this point. So I started at a firm straight out of college, and then was fortunate to have some great mentors, co-founded a firm called BEV Capital after that, and then co-founded OUP. And the topics we'll be talking about today have been a lifelong passion for me. How do you evaluate management teams and CEOs, and how do you optimize the success of startups through picking the best team possible?
Great, and we're really looking forward to hearing about your experience, Marc. And just to let our audience know, today's webinar is going to be a little unusual for us in the fact that we are going to be somewhat interactive. So get ready for some poll questions. Marc will be talking more about those in just a bit. But before we get started, a few other items, if we go to the next slide. The slides and a recording of this webinar are going to be available as usual on OUP's partner portal. And also a recording will be publicly available via our YouTube channel. You can see the QR codes where you can link to both of these here. The partner portal itself is an online portal for an online portal, not portable, for the tech transfer officers and researchers at our partner universities that's full of relevant tech transfer and startup content. Once you are in the portal, for which you do need to register, you'll find a downloadable presentation deck and a video link for this webinar on the webinars page, which is under the startup resources section. One thing I should note, we get asked a lot this during our webinars. Yes, afterwards, after the webinar, everyone who's attended will receive a link to this webinar in our YouTube channel, as well as a copy of the deck as well. We have two upcoming webinars as well that we have already scheduled that I've noted here. We have on July 31st, our second in the Meet the VCs webinar series, this time focused on climate tech. And on September 5th, we're going to have a terrific conversation on university royalty monetization with a few experts in those areas. We are also working on scheduling the second part of this webinar series, the Finding Your CEO webinar series, which we'll talk more about at the end itself of this webinar. We'll go to the next slide. A little bit about OUP before we get started. We are a venture fund that partners with academic institutions to invest in their startups, typically by exercising the participation rights available through their licenses. As a part of this partnership, the institutions share in our profits and receive programmatic support on tech transfer and academic startups. OUP is now in its fourth fund. We made over 140 investments in all areas of deep science, and many of those companies have had successful exits, either through IPO or merger and acquisition. And we'll go to the next slide to just show you an idea of the companies that we've invested in and the areas that we invest in as well. We're always happy to talk more about our model, so feel free to reach out to me or to Marc or anyone else on our team if you'd like more information. Before I pass it over to Marc, I will mention that we do love to receive questions throughout our webinars. I will be moderating the webinar, checking out the questions that come in. Please use the Q&A tool that is in Zoom so that we can monitor the questions there and answer them as appropriate. So with that, I will pass it off to Marc.
Thanks, Kirsten. So we're going to talk today about finding a CEO, and more specifically, really evaluating people that you are thinking about hiring or recruiting into a startup. And this is a topic that is a constant area of exploration and improvement at OUP. While we invest in deeply technical companies that are spin-outs from universities, at the end of the day, we view ourselves as betting on people. And so our own evaluation of the people we are investing behind or recruiting into companies is really critical. So we spent a lot of time trying to figure out how do you optimize that. And it's something that is very difficult to optimize. So the evaluation of people is very subjective, qualitative, and also subject to biases and other things. And so it's very difficult. And what we want to do is try to expose some of our thinking on how we evaluate CEOs and management teams to you. So if you're in a position either in a tech transfer office or with a startup and thinking about bringing in a team or a CEO or partnering with someone or simply evaluating if they're good, you'll at least have a sense of how we think about it, knowing that there is no right answer to these questions. All you can do is just try to be thoughtful in your evaluation of people and make sure you kind of see the full picture. As Kirsten mentioned, this will be highly interactive, and so it will require your participation, and we hope you do participate both in the polling as well as asking questions at any time. So first I want to start with some data. So what you see here is a pie chart that shows some survey data. This was a survey of about 900 venture capitalists asking the question of looking at your most successful portfolio companies, what was the most important factor that contributed to their success? And as you see, the largest area of the pie chart by far is the team. 56% of people said that team was the most important aspect of their company's success. It's what drove success. In my own experience in venture, that is very much the case as well. The team is everything. I'm also glad to see that at the top, when they asked, what is your contribution as a VC, or what is the board of directors contribution, VCs in the poll said it was pretty small, that it really was the team. I would say in private, lots of VCs do try to claim credit for the successes of their own companies. In our experience, it is the team itself, and it is not the VCs, not the board. Also, it's probably important to mention that while the data set for the survey included both life science and tech VCs, there are more tech VCs out there. So this data is likely weighted towards a tech VC perspective. Life science VCs tend to have the same answer, but not at the same degree. So I would suggest, although I don't have perfect data, if you asked only life science VCs about this, the team section would be a little bit smaller, technology would be a little bit bigger. And even within OUP, because we invest both in life science and tech companies, on the tech side, for us, it's 100% a bet on the team. On the life science side, that is true, but it's also a bet on the technology. And as we go through the talk, a lot of, because my orientation is on tech investments, the talk itself will skew a little bit towards a tech orientation, but I'll try to incorporate thoughts of what does this look like from a life science perspective. The same survey asked the inverse question, which is, what was the most important factor that contributed to your failures? And surprisingly enough, it was also team. So it's about the exact same percentage. And again, that is in accordance with my own experience, where in your failed investments as well, you think that there is a deeply, part of the fundamental flaw of the opportunity was the team. It's not always the case, but the team matters both in success and failure. Also, I would suggest on this slide, like the board and VCs are also, like failure is also really can be attributed to a board who had the right team there, didn't help figure out how to have the right team. But again, it just reinforces that team is everything. So now we are going to move on to a case study. And this is the part that will be the most interactive, where we are going to talk about a fictional company and fictional CEO candidates, and we're going to have you pick which you think is best. So we're going to go on this journey around a fictional company called Quantum Qubit, which is a photonic quantum computing company. So it's a quantum computing company that operates entirely with photonics. Again, it's a fictional company, but the details of this are based on real life experiences that we tend to have. At OUP, we've invested in a few quantum computing companies. And so for this case study, these are the key facts that you need to know. We don't need to go deep into technology, that it's a company that's early. So it will spend the next couple of years in product development. That product will be primarily hardware, but also will have a software layer. Along the way, it will need to interact with the market, in particular with corporate partners to define use cases. They don't have capital, so they will need to raise a $3 million seed round now after the CEO is hired, and then $30 million in an A round a couple of years from now. And there's a very small team there today. It's 3 people. They're all engineers, 2 of whom are grad students who came from the founding PI's lab and worked on this research and the photonic computing research in the lab. Plus, the founding PI is part of the team as well. So in total, there's 4 people there. So that's the company. We will then talk through 4 different candidate profiles, which I will lay out for you here. You will vote on which profile seems the most attractive to you of for this company. And then we're going to go into a lot more detail on those candidates, which would be the process we would go through at OUP if we were considering backing a CEO or hiring a CEO into the company. So here we go. So candidate A is a candidate who has 10 years of work experience. They started as a technical person at Broadcom. They were an engineer at Broadcom, which is a highly successful networking company. They left Broadcom to join a startup, and they became the VP of product development at that startup. Cisco then acquired that startup for $200 million. Candidate B is a successful repeat entrepreneur that had 3 companies. One was in software, one was in hardware, one was in medical devices. Of those 3 companies, one went public, one was acquired by Medtronic, a device company, and one is still private. Candidate C ran IBM's quantum computing group. They were the general manager of that group, and before that was CTO of IBM's server business. And candidate D is the founding PI. It was their lab that developed the photonic computing technology. And that academic previously had a startup as well, founded on their technology, where they served as CTO for 2 years. That was not in the quantum computing space. It was in the memory space and resistive RAM. So those are the 4 candidates. We are now going to put up a poll. In the poll, you will see the description of each of the candidates. And please go ahead and choose one of those candidates, and then we will show you the answer. So we'll leave the poll open for about 15 seconds. So if you could do it relatively quickly, that would be great. People are still voting, which is excellent. And when the numbers trail off, I will go ahead and expose it. Okay. In about 10 seconds, I'm going to close the poll. So if you haven't done it yet, please go ahead and do it. And I have to say we are getting excellent participation. 5 seconds, I'm closing it. All right, 3, 2, 1. Okay, I'm going to end the poll and I'm going to show the results. So what you see here is that 72% of people pick candidate B, the 3-time successful entrepreneur. So they are far and away the winner. The second place, but it's close, is candidate A, the product person. And then third was the general manager of IBM's quantum computing group, and the founding PI came in last. If there are any PIs on the call, please don't lose hope. But that's very helpful. And I would say that OUP's perspective is similar. So we would generically have picked candidate B as well, but we also do like candidate A. And we'll talk more about this, where candidates with a product background, in particular for tech companies, are really valuable because in a university setting, you need to take technology and build a product, and that product needs to satisfy a market need. And so we very much like product candidates as well. But now what we're going to do is we're going to go deeper into these candidates, and then we're going to vote again once you know a lot more about them. So this is first candidate A, who was the product-oriented candidate from Broadcom and then VP of product development at a startup. So what I'm going to talk about is what we would ask and how we, if we're face-to-face with this candidate in due diligence, what are the things that we would go deeper into? First, we would focus heavily on their track record of success. They've been at 2 places, a big corporation and a startup. We would want to know everything we could about both of those. So while they were at Broadcom, it's hard to evaluate somebody's corporate experience in a large corporation. You never really know who's responsible for what. Lots of people claim success for the same thing, and nobody claims, that they're responsible for the failures. And so figuring that out is hard. We look a lot at interim promotions within corporations. What were the time intervals between promotions? What level did they get promoted to? Also, was their work narrow or broad? So those are the things we focus on there. Second was the startup of success. And it is often the case that you will see entrepreneurs talk about the fact that they had a company that was successfully sold. They'll just say, oh, Cisco bought it, but they won't tell you how much. Or they'll tell you it was acquired for $200 million. But you need to figure out how much capital was raised, how long it took, and to really know if that was successful. So if Cisco acquired the startup for 200 million and they'd raised 30 million of capital, that would be a terrific success. If they'd raised 200 million of capital, then they would not have created equity value at all. So you need to understand those details. And then third, we want to understand at the startup how important was this candidate? Were they a direct report to the CEO? Were they on the executive team? Were they in board meetings? Did they help with fundraising? So we spent a lot of time on the track record of success of each candidate. Going beyond that, we also look a lot at transitions. Why did they leave? There are good reasons to leave and bad. The best reason from our standpoint for this candidate to have left Broadcom is if their boss left Broadcom and became CEO of that startup and brought them with them. And that way you see kind of their boss kind of vote with their actions that they want to work with them again, or things like that. So we look a lot at signals around transitions and what do they mean? You want to make sure that they're transitioning for good reasons and not for bad ones. Thirdly, we look at domain expertise, although this is hard. And it's not always clear that you need domain expertise in the person, you need it in the company. What's hard is in something like quantum computing, very few people have domain expertise because it's a new domain. And so what we often look for here are people who are technically curious and they have a broad aperture of understanding technology, and they've shown in the past that they can learn new technologies. This candidate would be more interesting for us if they went from Broadcom, a networking startup, to a semiconductor company, to like a chip company, and they changed domains a little bit, and it's shown they could learn new domains. And so if they're very narrow, we're more worried. If they've shown they could be broad in the past, that's better. And then we dig a lot into leadership. So this candidate would be a first-time CEO. So there's a question of, can they be a leader? We focus a lot on how they manage people. Did they hire people? How have the people they've hired in the past done? Have they been successful or not? Did their colleagues, people who reported to candidate A at Broadcom follow them to the startup? So we look a lot at characteristics that show that they're good at recruiting, they're good at managing people, and people want to work for them. We look a lot at innate talent. I'll talk about this a little bit more later. Just overall on intelligence, are they charismatic? Are they passionate? Do they learn? Do they listen well? Listening skills really matter a lot. And so that's really everything on candidate A. These are all, while this applies to candidate A, it really applies to all of the different candidates that we think about here. I will say, just so when we come back to polling again at the end and you decide if this candidate is a good candidate or not, that the startup itself, in this case, was a real success. The company had raised $30 million, sold for $200 million, and the answer to all of the questions at the top were all good. This candidate in diligence performed better than we thought. Like, did really well at Broadcom, did well at the startup, and went up in our mind in this fictional case as we went into diligence. So then I'm going to go on to candidate B, the three-time entrepreneur. And with this candidate, we would be all over their track record more than anything, because they have enough of a track record. You should be able to evaluate the candidate based on that. And what we start with, and usually what most people start with, is learning from the candidate themselves about their track record. So this is what we learned from this candidate as we spent a lot of time face-to-face with the candidate, learning about the previous companies. The first company, which was a $1 billion IPO, was founded 10 years ago, went public 5 years ago, trades at $1 billion today. The medical device company was acquired for $80 million and it raised 50. So not that successful, but that's not necessarily bad. Failures can mean more sometimes than successes. Investors got their money back. They did not lose their money. And then the third company is still private, funded by two very strong VCs that candidate B raised the capital from Sequoia and Excel. And then the CEO told us they recruited their replacement after raising a round because they wanted someone with domain expertise. So this is the level that you often get after 2 or 3 hours with an entrepreneur. And I find it's often the level that other people get to, whether they're investors or founders who are interviewing a candidate or tech transfer offices. And the point that I want to highlight heavily is this is not deep enough. And so with candidates like this, what often happens is the following. You go further and you find out that first company that's $1 billion company today, the CEO had left a long time ago. They left 3 years prior to the IPO, and that they didn't really drive the success that got the company public and the success thereafter. Secondly, that medical device buyout wasn't even for $80 million, that only 30 was upfront and the rest was an earnout, and none of that earnout had been paid. And with the third company that's still private, the CEO was actually pushed out. And getting that true information is really hard. We often call VCs or other people at the company. We work hard to figure this out. But what you really want to do is get to the level of insight and information on the bottom here. Don't be satisfied with the top. And too often we find that people get kind of they get in some sense tricked, and trick probably overstates it, but they believe somebody is great when in fact they aren't. And at the extreme, you want to make sure there's not an ethical issue here. And in this case, whether it's an ethical issue or not depends on the details of what did that CEO tell you. For us, if we find out that the CEO told us something that's false, like that's black and white for us, then we will not back them. We would much rather somebody tell us they got fired and be honest about it and what they learned from it. So we're also looking to evaluate their ethics, and you should be doing the same because that really matters. So then I've gotten candidate C. I won't go into as much detail on C and D. Digging deeper, candidate C like is far and away the strongest, has the strongest technical knowledge on quantum computing of any of these candidates. They've been at IBM for 30 years. And also IBM's quantum computing group had 250 people. That was a very large group. And the candidate expects a large salary at the start. There is good and bad in this from our perspective. The good is the knowledge about quantum computing. Like that is unprecedented, in particular in a space like quantum computing, that very few people have that kind of experience. The fact that they've been at IBM for 30 years for us is a bad sign. We tend to not like candidates who have only been in corporate settings, and in particular been in corporate settings for a very long time. If they were in a corporate setting for 4 or 5 years and couldn't stand it and had to get out, then that's from our standpoint a good fact. If they were a lifer and there forever, there are so many habits that you learn and work styles around managing big groups and moving slowly and having lots of meetings and things that are kind of the antithesis of moving fast in a startup, that it makes us very worried. And in general, we want to back people who've moved out of the corporate world into startups. We want to back them on their second startup, not their first. We want them to go learn these lessons elsewhere, not when we're an investor. And then finally, the last point around their salary, it is important for us to make sure that everybody is aligned towards creating equity value. When somebody wants a large salary, in particular at an early stage startup, we are worried that that's going to make them too comfortable. We don't want them comfortable, frankly. We want them to feel like their payout is going to come from the equity value and nothing else. And we also want them to sweat every dollar that's spent. And taking a big salary up front is the opposite of that. So we are looking for people who are scrappy and stretch every dollar. So those are some thoughts about candidate C. And then candidate D, who is the founding PI, as we dug further on that candidate, first we learned, and this is often the case with academic PIs who are at the top of their field, they actually are great in terms of industry connections. So in addition to being great technically, having cutting edge technology that can build great products, they also can connect with potential corporate partners, investors, and other things in a unique way, and that can be a real asset to the company. Second, there are people in candidate D's lab that want to follow D into the company. That is a great sign for us. And then third, D at D's previous startup, they were pushed out, and D is disgruntled about that and wants to be CEO and prove that they can be CEO. This is a mixed bag. We're okay that they were pushed out of a previous startup. Not everyone is successful. What was their first startup? That's not the problem for us. The problem for us is how strongly are they determined to prove themselves as CEO? And really, is their ego in the way of company success? So what we want to make sure is that if candidate D were running the company, they would do everything possible to make the company successful, not everything possible to make candidate D successful as CEO. And those are different. And we want to make sure that their ego is not in the way. So that's some highlight of these candidates. We're going to go back to voting now. But before I do, Kirsten, were there any questions that we should use to clarify anything?
Not to clarify, but we do have some questions, but we will get to this.
Okay. All right. I'll leave it to you to call it out what is right. Okay. Now we're going to go back and we're going to pick again these candidates. how has your perspective changed? If at all, it's okay if it hasn't. So please go ahead and vote again of whether you pick each of these candidates. And again, we're getting great participation, so thank you. I get to see the numbers move along the way, which is kind of fun. I wish everybody could see this. All right, and leave it up 5 more seconds. 4, 3, 2, 1. All right, and I'm going to share the results. And now there was a massive shift towards candidate A, which I assume partly because candidate B did not turn out to be as good as they looked. And again, that is the journey we are on all the time. When you dig deep, candidates don't look as good as they seem to be. And candidate A, as I mentioned earlier, like we have a strong preference towards product candidates. We would pick, based on all the facts we knew, we would definitively pick candidate A as well, both for the facts that came out here and that for early stage tech companies, product development experience really helps. So I'm going to stop sharing candidate. The founding PI did not do any better in this case, neither did, and the quantum computing general manager did a little worse. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing that. Thank you for participating in that.
We do have a question, Mark. Do you mind if
Yes.
I just
No,
jump in
please
here?
do.
So would your perspective on candidate D, the faculty member, change were they to quit their faculty position and devote themselves full time over A and B then?
Yeah, it's an excellent question. And I would say when anybody from an academic background, whether it's a professor or a postdoc or a grad student, wants to go into a startup to either lead the startup as CEO or be part of the team, we want them to be all in. We need them to quit actually, or go on sabbatical. Sabbatical is okay as well, because startups move really fast, and as a generalization, they move faster than academic world. And we want to make sure that people with an academic orientation, where it's their first startup, they're all in. They're spending all of their time on it on the startup, and they can move fast. So I would say it's a requirement for us that they do leave either as on sabbatical or full time. And for candidate D to be CEO, they would have to be full time. In the case of the facts that came out here, though, where candidate D also has a bit of a chip on their shoulder of wanting to prove themselves, there's a little piece of me that would worry. Like, again, you want them to step aside basically if they're not the right CEO long term, and you want to make sure you're not boxed in, that they've left their academic job. This is even more important than, and that in all situations they would never step aside for someone better. So there's a little bit of a mixed bag on it, but I would say again, it's a requirement that they would be full time.
We have a few more questions about the candidate pool. Do you mind if I keep
Please,
asking?
please.
Okay. Is there a concern in hiring an outside CEO if the PI is going to be extremely upset about not being the CEO? The company will likely need the technical expertise of the PI and the buy-in of the PI. So is this a consideration as well?
Yeah. Well, it is a concern, and I would say more than anything, what we need is there to be great chemistry between the founding team and any outsiders that are hired. So if there's not great chemistry, then like that in and of itself is a knockout factor. And we have had companies, unfortunately, where we invested, we thought there would be good chemistry, and there were not. And usually the outsider winds up leaving actually. So we would want to, that's what we would want to make sure. If the founding PI, it's hard though. Like if the founding PI is deeply upset that they're not CEO, if we're not prepared to back that founding PI as CEO, basically we don't wind up investing. You wind up in a situation where, at least from a UP standpoint, we wouldn't invest and they're free to go do what they want. We wouldn't want to invest in a situation where our only choice as CEO is the founding PI. We would simply prefer not to invest.
Next question. And I think this may be a hard one to answer, but I think it's a good question. Is in real life, what is the choice distribution percentage between A, B, C, and D? So how often do you have each one of these types of candidates?
Excellent question. In real life, there are probably 20 candidate profiles. Like there's not four. So it's hard. It's just a much wider range than this. But I'll try to give some sense. Candidate A is a little bit rare and rarer than we would like. And I say that because oftentimes, in particular in tech companies, we want to get a product person from the outside, somebody who has experience developing products and developing products that the market wants early. We want them in early. It doesn't have to be a CEO. It's often not a CEO, say a VP of product. Finding those people is really hard at an early stage. And so candidate A is fairly rare. Candidate B, in the reality of what I showed, where the track record is very mixed, there are many of those. There are actually a lot of those where they have not had a lot of success, but they've had a lot of experience. And so there are reasonable numbers of candidate Bs out there. Candidate Cs, again, particularly like in situations it's not that often that you would see somebody with 30 years of experience want to go run a startup. Although I would say, and the folks that are on the call from tech transfer offices, you may see this sometimes when you have EIRs or mentors in residence or other things. Oftentimes those are people who spend most of their career in the corporate world and are now looking to engage in startups, often as advisors rather than full-time people. We think they're better as advisors or better again on their second startup, not their first. And candidate D, everyone I think on the call knows that there are lots of those, and different phenotypes of what their orientation is and how strongly they want to be CEO.
We have a whole host of other questions, but I think some of them will be answered in some other parts of your talk. So I think maybe we should continue, and then I will.
Good, that's great. But let me keep encouraging questions. If you're out there in the audience, please keep asking them. Kirsten will get to them. We love questions. It's way more fun than going through slides. So these are some of the takeaways we'd hope you have from this. So the first is that there are lots of molds of successful entrepreneurs. There's not one best thing. And again, this is subjective. So people come from lots of different backgrounds, and that's okay. Second, and most important, it's important to peel the onion and figure out what somebody is really like. They often seem great at first, and you don't really know until you go deep. So go deep. Particularly go deep on their track record, their previous leadership experiences, their past failures. Failure is a good thing. We like failure. I like failure. I just want to make sure people have learned from it. And I also want to make sure they don't push it under the rug. Like I want them to call it out, acknowledge it, and learn from it. That to me is way better than even just continued success all the time. You do want to understand someone's motivations. In particular, are they focused on getting a job and a salary versus doing everything humanly possible to make the startup successful? And finally, make sure their ego does not get in the way. In particular, in this case, the ego was attached to the founding PI, but it doesn't have to be that way. Oftentimes, egos are attached to every one of those kinds of candidates. What we always want to make sure is that a candidate will do what's best for the company, not for them. And we spend a lot of time trying to figure that out. Beyond that, I'll hit some other characteristics that we think about when we're evaluating CEOs. And on the slide after this, I'm going to actually show you some scoring that we do when we're evaluating people. And so I've bolded here some of the characteristics that we think about that we haven't already discussed. One is that we do want to make sure they're thoughtful. So we want to make sure they're making deeply informed decisions. They're thinking things through well at both strategic levels and tactical levels. And the only way to really do this is to get somebody off of slides, get them out of PowerPoint and get them out of presenting and spend a lot of time with them and kind of problem solving with them. And we try when we're considering investing in a company or considering hiring somebody, spend a lot of time in person with the management team, figuring this aspect out. How thoughtful are they? Related to that, we do prefer to invest in people we consider to be continuous learners, meaning they are always looking to improve. They're also always looking for market signals and information. They're accepting input from others. They take feedback. They learn from mistakes. They learn from customer signals. So they're always taking in new information, trying to separate the signal from the noise because there's a lot of noise in that, and then acting on it. And so the phenotype of a continuous learner is something we like a lot. And then we drill a lot into leadership skills, and I highlighted two at the top under the leadership area of can they hire and retain great people. So we do look a lot like if there's a team in place and we're considering investing in the company, we try to spend time face to face with the direct reports of the team to really, in part, to figure out is the CEO a good recruiter? Have they hired great people? We also look at this how kind of entrepreneurial and passionate that CEO and the team are. This is where you need to be full time if you're an academic. You need to be all in and you need to be passionate. And I would say, in my own experience, I found that passion is not everything, but there is a correlation between kind of being intensely entrepreneurial and passionate and ultimate success. Beyond that, one of the things I haven't hit is that every CEO needs to be a fundraiser and a salesperson for the company, because just about any company that's in the venture world is going to need to raise capital, and you're going to need to hire people, you're going to need to sign up customers, and so you're always selling. And so selling skills matter a lot, and that can be hard to find sometimes, but in particular around fundraising in the market we're in now, which is a very difficult fundraising market, people who aren't great salespeople don't do as well, and that's hard. And then the last 2 points I make, one, scrappiness is something we think about. Can they accomplish a lot with a little? We have found in our own portfolio, I'm going to show data a little bit later on successful phenotypes of CEOs from our portfolio. One of the things I won't show data on, but I can talk about is that we have found that companies that were capital efficient before we invested have generally been more successful afterwards. And so capital efficiency matters. And then lastly, I did hit the chemistry with founders, which is kind of a black and white thing. Almost if there's no chemistry, you can't do it. And then this is how we turn things like this into a way to evaluate. So this is not the right way to evaluate a CEO or a person. It's a tool that we use to try to make sure we are thinking about all of the relevant things that matter for a management team, and that we're kind of putting ourselves to the test of thinking through each aspect of it and trying to be concrete about it. So we rate people on a 1 to 10 scale. There is no formula to say you need to be stronger at certain things, weaker at others. You can't just add it up. And I say that from having tried. Like, I would love this to be a formula and for us to be able to automate how we evaluate people. I have found that it defies all deep analytic assessment. But what you can do is use scoring rubrics to force yourself to think broadly about candidates. And that's how we do it. And we also use it within our team. So we could see if you have 5 people fill this out on one candidate and we disagree on something, we can try to figure out why, and is there actually any information in that. So Kirsten, let me pause there because now I'm talking about what do you do if you don't have a CEO in place,
Right.
which may address some of the
We have a
questions. Is there
lot
anything you
of
want to hit?
questions, so let's get to
Okay.
let's get to some of these questions. So,
Okay.
and this one's great. Is there an upper age limit where it might be concern for VCs? Say someone around typical retirement age.
Yeah. For me, no. I can't comment on all VCs, but it's to me, it's all about intensity, passion. I would say right now we are in deep diligence on a company, Kirsten, you could probably guess which one, where the CEO has had a lot of experience. Like, they truly are a serial entrepreneur. They are also very late in their career. And the CEO has an extraordinary amount of energy, and they're driven, they're working all hours of the day. And that's what we care about. We do not at all care about age. We care about kind of intensity, skill set. And so I can't comment on others, but for us, it's irrelevant.
Great. In what way does OUP participate in selecting a CEO for a startup? Or are we sometimes just using this analysis? Are we mainly using this analysis based on our investment decisions then for the CEO? But
Yeah,
do we
it is
participate?
mostly the latter. So what I've done is taken what we do is we evaluate a CEO who's usually in place, and just to help people think about it, gave us the false choice of, let's imagine we were picking which of these is best. But in most of the companies we invest in, the CEO is in place. We prefer that. I am going to talk in a second, and we're all going to vote. I'm like, what do you do if you can't have that CEO in place? There are times that we will invest in a company where there is no CEO in place, and we agree in advance we'll go do a search. that search may happen quickly or at some point in the future. So we will do that also. And when we do that, we are very involved in finding the right CEO.
Great. Um, so you mentioned earlier that a later career person, so we actually just had a conversation about the later career person, but you were talking about a later career person, particularly who'd been in industry for or a large corporation for a long time. Why do you think that they would be better as an advisor than a CEO? Would you dig into that a
Yeah.
little?
The reason, and let me not make it about later in their career, so because
Yeah.
it's not about their age, it's about how long they've been in a corporate environment and how different it is to be in a startup environment than a corporate environment. And I would say I'm talking in generalities here. There are lots of exceptions. And I'm sure, like I've backed people in the past who came out of a corporate environment. But in general, if you've been in a corporate environment for, let me say, 15 or 20 years or more, and you have never been in a startup, everything you've learned about how to work, how to pace your work, how to interact with people, how to be productive, is shaped by that experience. And that experience is just fundamentally different because startups, you need to make every dollar work. Your time speeds up by 3 or 4 times. You need to move 3 or 4 times as quickly. You don't have the resources. And if you're a senior manager in a startup, even a CEO, you need to be a doer. You can't just manage other people. And when you're in a corporation for that long, you wind up just managing other people. So the skill sets just wind up being very different. I would say, as an analogy, it's also a little true about a lifelong professor at a university who has just been in a university setting for 20 or 30 years. The skill sets to run a successful lab are often different at that point than running a startup. So that's a very difficult transition to make because the work requirements and the work style is so different. Doesn't mean it's impossible, it's just hard.
So going back to your previous slide about the skills that you're looking for in a CEO, and the characteristics, actually, I think, was it the slide before that? It might have been. So to what extent, I apologize, I don't remember which slide it was now, but what extent do you need all the skills in the CEO versus supplemented by the others on the team?
Really good question, and I could maybe highlight here. You do not need all the skills in a CEO at all, and it would be impossible to have all of the skills in a CEO. So what you need to do is know what skills the CEO has and doesn't have, and ideally the CEO themselves would know it, and then you want to build around it. So for example, let's say the CEO doesn't have domain expertise. The second column, top left up here, the second column, you would want to hire somebody who has domain expertise. It's often the case that a CEO might not have domain expertise, and somebody else would. Or other areas they may not be great at selling. You want them to be great at selling, but they may not be great in kind of like driving revenue in the way like a salesperson would. So you'd want to hire that. So you can't get this in everyone, and you want to make sure the team ultimately can get it.
Great. We had a couple of questions about creating pools of candidates uh, to be able to, be able to have a choice for your possible CEOs. And we are going to talk about sourcing in our next webinar. So we're going to be talking with a couple of talent people as well as people who've found their CEOs, et cetera. But Mark, could you briefly comment on this about how to build up talent pools? So
Yeah, and I thought the question might come up, so I have a slide here as a backup to address it. But again, the next webinar will be all about that. But I would say kind of think about 3 ways to source talent. One is use VCs, actually. So a lot of companies, when they are fundraising, they find co-founders, CEOs, because VCs have networks and they use those networks. And so if ever you're fundraising, use that fundraising both as a way to fundraise, but also as a way to build your team, to get customer introduction. So VCs have lots of networks, but they are imperfect also. Like, it is hard for us to find CEOs as well. Second, in the upper right, use your university. And so universities have lots of resources, entrepreneurs and residents and mentors, previous startups, alum, There are also like there's an online system called Academic Venture Exchange that helps with this. So use all of the resources in your university, the business school, everything you can, and leverage that as much as possible. And then the bottom is around like doing it yourself, which you fundamentally have to do. You can't rely on the top two. You need to, you can only really control what you do. And so when we are recruiting and we don't have somebody in our network, the first place we go to is LinkedIn. And LinkedIn is really an extraordinary recruiting tool. And so you can actually post in LinkedIn for not that much money. Or what we do is we identify the 10 companies we would like to recruit from. They're usually other startups, and we go find VP level people, not CEOs, from those companies, and we reach out to them cold. And the response rate is pretty reasonable. And it's manual. It takes kind of grinding it out, but use LinkedIn to reach out to people cold. Second, just networking and events. A lot of that is around events, local events, connecting with people in the entrepreneurial ecosystem, as much friends, whoever you can get introduced to. You have to, it is unfortunately, recruiting is a very manual process. And it's another thing, just like I wish picking a CEO was an algorithm, I wish recruiting a CEO was also something you could just set an AI system on and go. But it doesn't work that way. And so you get out of it what you put into it time-wise, and you have to put a lot of time into it. Just as an analogy, CEOs, some of the best CEOs I've ever backed will say they spent 30% of their time continuously recruiting, even when they didn't need anybody. They're always meeting people, always looking for good talent. So great CEOs are always doing these kinds of things to find good recruits.
This actually leads very well into our next question, which is, what is the right time for a PAI to start networking with potential CEOs? And for example, could actually a potential CEO be helping with maybe some selection technology use cases in the lab with the things that the PI is working on?
Yeah, I'd say it's never too early.
Yeah.
Like, and you want to work with multiple CEOs. So like being able to, what I love about the question is being able to work with somebody before you actually work with them is great. Like getting to know somebody and walk before you run is terrific. And probably the greatest way to be able to evaluate somebody. So it's never too early, and they'll bring outside market knowledge, hopefully, into your lab to help you figure out. So they bring kind of functional benefits and also relationship benefits as you're thinking about it. Okay, so I'm wondering if I should keep going.
Yes.
So,
Can I ask you one more question?
yeah,
Because I do want to get to the rest of our slides, but
yeah.
how should, because we have a number of technology transfer officers on the call, how should they as tech transfer officers be doing a better job of setting expectations with PIs of what it takes to launch and grow a successful startup?
Well, generically, I think the most important thing is to convince them that they can't do it themselves, and that, frankly, to be honest, that they most likely should not be CEO. That's not always the case, and there are some extraordinary companies that had a PI as CEO, but for the most part, it's really, really hard. And so convincing them more than anything that they need an outside CEO and an outside team, and the earlier they start that process, the better. I think that's the most important thing.
A person who's doing this full time, like it is a full-time thing that
Correct.
doing, and
Correct.
that's one of the issues. So anyways, okay, I'm going to let you go on to this because I do know we want to
Okay.
finish up these
There are
slides.
two other general concepts I want to hit, and then we can come back to questions. One is, what if you don't have a perfect CEO, which that question connects to, and you're going to vote on this as well. And so let's imagine you don't have a CEO, which is often the case with university startups at the early stage. You have four choices of what you would pick. These are choices we face all the time. First, you could hire a less than perfect outside CEO. So let's call it they're okay, but they're not great. Second, you could have one of the academic founders, which could be either a PI or a grad student, become the permanent CEO. Third, you could have one of the same academic founders or an outsider become an interim CEO, where an interim CEO would mean they say, I will be CEO until we find someone better than me. Or fourth, you could have no CEO and just run lean without anyone there and just run among consensus. So with that, we're going to have you vote. This is the second to last poll. So please go and vote, and we'll put it up now. And once again, everyone is jumping in. And we will keep the poll open for about 10 more seconds. Love how much everybody is actually participating. It's still going up. Excellent. Okay, I'm gonna count down 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and thank you everybody for participating. Okay, let's look at the results. So what we see is that people pick strongly the interim CEO and either academic founders or an outsider. And second would be a less than perfect outside CEO. I would say that this result, we have given this talk mostly in person. The results generally don't skew this strongly in one direction. That's actually pretty interesting to me and valuable. And so that's really helpful. Now I'm going to talk about our preference, which is exactly the same. So it's first of all is to have someone be interim CEO. And the main thing that we are reacting to is what's number 4 for us on the OUP order of preference. Hiring the less than perfect CEO, we think can be kind of the end of the startup. Because when you have a less than perfect CEO, in particular who wants to stay CEO long term, that's a barrier. Like we don't want to invest in a business where we think somebody is suboptimal and we're going to need to make a change, and they're not on board with that. And so we simply won't invest in those companies. So hiring the less than perfect CEO for us is the worst. That's the piece we feel more strongly about. So choice number 1, having someone become interim and having them acknowledge truly that they're willing to just be interim until we find someone better, we think is best. When we're in those situations, we spend a lot of time being sure that they mean it, that they mean that they're willing to be interim. And that's not that, and we have lots of questions and lots of pushing to make sure that they really mean it. And number 2 for us is, one of those, like one of the academic founders becoming permanent CEO, but the same thing, but they need to be willing to step aside. So it's okay for a PI to say, I want to be CEO long term, but the moment I'm not right, you can move me, just tell me, and I'll step aside. That's okay also. The key is we want to make sure that they're not a barrier to stepping aside. So I was glad to see all of us be on the same page on this. Kirsten, any questions on that, or should I keep going?
Not this. No.
Okay. All right. Last piece of polling. And then we'll stop and we'll show some data and then stop with questions. So I mentioned earlier we like to learn from our data and like companies that were capital efficient before we invested or capital efficient later. One of the things we've done more recently is look at the phenotype of CEOs and say how successful have they been in our portfolio. And we now have a big enough portfolio, we've been around for long enough that there's real signal in our data. So we query our data a lot around what can we learn. So what you see on the left is a bar chart where the height of the bar shows what our return on investment has been of CEOs of different phenotypes, but I don't show you the phenotypes yet. It's intentionally left blank. And the phenotypes are what was the prior experience of the CEO at investment. This is for tech companies only, and it's within OUP's portfolio. And so the categories that we evaluated are on the right side here of whether they were in the C-suite at a prior startup. So they were a senior level person, but not a CEO at a prior startup. They were a grad student or a postdoc. They were at an individual contributor, meaning they were a lower level person at a startup or a large company. They were a professor who became CEO, or they were a repeat entrepreneur, but they've had more than one startup. So as CEO. So those are the categories. You get to vote for the last time of which one of these do you think is the far left bar of the most successful performing phenotype. We'll go ahead and open that up.
And again, I'm going to remind people this is for physical science associated companies, not life science. And Marc is going to comment on the life science part in just a bit too.
Well. Thank you again for continuing to vote. I'm going to close it in about 10 seconds. Nicely, we've had a similar number of people voting for every poll. So thank you for continuing to participate. Okay, 5 seconds, 4, 3, 2, 1. All right, and let's look at the results. Okay, so 48% thinks the repeat is entrepreneur on the left. The repeat entrepreneur is the bar on the left. 32% think it's the C-suite at prior startups, and then professor all the way at the bottom at 2%, grad students at 11%. So That's really interesting. Now, and I would say I would have expected the repeat entrepreneur to be on the far left. It is not. So let me close this out. So here is the actual data. The far left is the grad student and postdoc, and they have outperformed repeat entrepreneurs, which is in second right now. Professors have done poorly, individuals, contributors have done poorly. This data was interesting for us also. I wouldn't say it surprised us, but it has had us pay attention quite a bit. And we've delved into a lot of why, like what is going on here and what's behind this and what can we learn from it. First, we're thrilled to see it. We're thrilled to see grad students and postdocs do great. And we want to back more of them. But we've also had to dissect the why of it. And so I'll talk here and on the next slide a little bit of the why of it. First, there is a selection bias in our data around the kinds of grad students and postdocs we have chosen to back. And they are ones that we have gotten to know over time and have watched. So for those of you who work with us closely, you'll know that we like to get to know startups early. We even go into labs, and we like to stay in touch with startups before they even raise money. And maybe as they raise a seed round, maybe we'll invest, maybe we won't, and we'll stay in touch over time. And if you look at the grad students and postdocs we've invested in, we had known them for a while and we had watched them perform. So it's really hard to see up front if a grad student will be successful. It's easier to see over time. And certain grad students just have great innate talents, and you see it as they operate. And that's what we are looking to do. So you can't take this data to say that all grad students and postdocs are always going to outperform. It's the special ones that are. And the key is, if you're thinking about yourself, make sure you are one of the special ones. And if you're evaluating one, or you're a tech transfer office or elsewhere, make sure you're thinking about it. I'm now going to talk about what we think makes them special and some of the common characteristics of those grad students. And it's really all around the first point, which is deep humility and everything that comes from that. So when you're deeply humble, you take lots of advice. You're a great listener. You take feedback. You pay attention to everything. You then surround yourselves with talent that is much better than you. And you seek out people that are stronger than you, that can teach you with domain expertise. You use outside advisors well. And then over time, you develop good salesmanship skills, but it's really everything at the top here, which is all the same thing, which is you're a sponge, you're hungry, you're humble, and you try to surround yourself with everybody you can that will make you better, and then you rise to the occasion. And that really does define all of the grad students that we have backed in our portfolio. And then I'd say at the very bottom, grad students and postdocs are often the most intensely passionate. It's often their technology, and they want to commercialize it, and they have left academia, and so they're all in. So since we've had this data, we have invested in some more grad students that fit this phenotype because we are interested in it. So with that, I think I'm going to stop there, and then Kirsten, we can come back to questions.
Yes. So a question about the difference for life sciences. I'm sorry if you mentioned that I was looking at the questions.
I did not.
Okay.
So in general, so I would say in the data itself, which I can flip back to, we did not see a signal with life science companies in the same way. So you actually kind of saw all the bars similar. Like you couldn't differentiate a CEO's success based on their background. Whereas on the tech side, you could. On the life science side, you could also derive some interesting insights from that. You'd want to believe the repeat entrepreneurs were the most successful, but it wasn't a giant signal at the same time. I would say in general, with life science companies, we do think that like particularly if it's a biotech, like domain expertise matters more there. Much on the tech side, you can learn a domain. On the life science side, it's really hard to. So if it's a biotech, like really having concrete drug development experience matters a lot.
Great. I'm going to keep asking questions. We are going to go a little bit over our hour. Just to let people know, when you leave the webinar, there will be a survey. We really do appreciate you answering this. I think it's a 5-question survey so that we do get ideas for topics in the future. This will also help us with the next webinar that we're going to have on sourcing your potential CEOs. So please do answer the survey if you can. But I know we're at the hour now and some people are going to have to leave. So next question here, Marc, actually on this slide, how do you distinguish between C-suite at prior startups and the repeat entrepreneurs? When you were doing this analysis, what was being looked at?
Yeah, the way we scored it is if they were a CEO in the past, they
Okay,
were a repeat entrepreneur. If they were not CEO, but an executive at a startup, then they were in C-suite.
okay, great, thank you. All right. Other questions that we have here. How do you recommend, are the groups that you have that can actually promote their opportunities to CEOs to get a variety of campus of candidates? Are there groups that people can go to try to find their CEOs?
Yeah. I wish there were. There is, I mentioned earlier, there is something called AVX or Academic Venture Exchange, which is an online portal designed to try to match university startups with CEOs. And so I would encourage people to go there. But it is, I would say, it's a it is still a manual process. So we have found we used to be very interested in automated ways to recruit, including portals and things like that. I think our sense is that it's hard to find the very best candidates that way, but it's a good thing to do. And some companies have found good candidates that way. So I would definitively do it. But we haven't found great networks or organizations that can all of a sudden give you 20 or 30 great CEOs.
Why do you think individual contributors did have not have as much success on this
Yeah.
particular?
I don't know on that. And I'd have to go back and look at the data. The truth
Yeah.
is, and maybe we should disaggregate that also. We focused on the good performers and how do we find more of those. So the question's making me think we should go into the individual contributors and see if we can figure out the characteristics we want to stay away from.
Right. All right. Do you have any ideas, any insights? It goes back to the finding candidates part of this, but there are these speed dating slash networking abilities potentially to find CEOs with startups. Have you ever experienced one of these, or any insights into those types of
Yeah.
operations?
I don't have experience with them, so I can't comment. Like I would say you want to do everything and anything and everything to try to find a CEO. So go for it. Like I would, if I were a founder and I didn't know where else to go and I wanted a CEO, I would definitively go to those. Um, but but I think you can't also rely on it. But sometimes what happens with things like that, with anything that creates collisions and interactions, is you may not even find the CEO there, but you'll get connected to someone else. Like it starts you down a chain. Oftentimes when we have new relationships we think are valuable, let's say with a serial entrepreneur, it's because I met someone else who introduced me to them or something like that. So you do want to be out there interacting with people in the entrepreneurial world because the introductions they make could get you somewhere.
So next question is the data that we've shown here, and again, this is only our data from our own tech portfolio. So this is a limited data set. Although I have to say, I've talked about this data set with some other groups, and they've also seen this in their own portfolio. So it's kind of interesting. I don't know if anyone else has actually shown anything on this, but the data here. And noting the grad student postdoc, but yet also the repeat entrepreneurs being very successful in our portfolio. But does requiring a level of experience, though, really limit that CEO candidate pool? And here we are showing, right, like there could be someone who doesn't have as much experience, whereas, it could be someone who does. Just talk about the limitations on the candidate pool and how we're now thinking about that when we're looking at opportunities to invest in, as well as who's obviously leading that opportunity.
Yeah, yeah, it's a good question. So let me try to answer it. I would say that if you had a choice between somebody with a lot of experience but did not have the best innate skill set around something like the innate characteristics of judgment and thoughtfulness and listening and salesmanship and versus somebody who has all of those innate skills but no experience, I would pick the innate skills over the experience.
Mhm.
And because I think ultimately the innate skills matter the most. And it's similar to Kirsten, what you said. There are other VCs out there that don't invest in the university space that have basically talked about like university college dropouts being their best performing people.
Mhm.
Also, people with no experience at all, really having the most upside if they're the right people because they have the right innate upside. So we don't have an experience bar to say they must have a certain experience. We do have like some innate personality trait bar, like they must be good at certain things. And so that matters to us a little bit more. Ideally, you'd find both. Like that's the
Yeah,
ideal world
right.
where you get a both.
And unfortunately, none of us live in an ideal world
Right.
most of the time. Um, this person asks about the grad students postdocs, and I don't think we have this information, but I still want to address their question. Have they potentially accessed any training in our entrepreneurship education or gone through an accelerator, et cetera? Is this something that we look at too when we're evaluating who to invest in?
Yeah.
It's grad
Um,
student postdoc route.
yeah. I don't know. Like we haven't done that. I would say that there's always natural limitations to an analysis like this, which is it's not a big enough data set that if you then
Mhm.
take all the grad student CEOs and find different characteristics in each one, ideally you'd have enough overlap among them that there would be significance in the answer. And it's not, well, we do think it's a big enough data set for this conclusion. We don't think it's a big enough data set to really disaggregate and derive meaning from it. But it's a good idea, and maybe like as our data set grows, I'd like to do that.
So we've talked a lot about CEOs at the point where we're looking at investing them at the VC point. But most tech transfer offices are dealing with very early stage technologies where the CEO position isn't likely a full-time job yet. And can you talk about a little bit how to source folks that would fit more of that mold?
Yeah. That for us fits in the category of an interim CEO. And so sometimes those, let's call it a part-time CEO, like a part-time CEO is okay at the start. It's similar to a CEO if like the clock is not ticking, if you haven't raised money yet and you're a tech transfer office trying to progress a company or you're an academic founder, as long as you haven't kind of raised outside capital and you started to hire people and you don't have a burn rate, all of those things would lead like to a ticking clock. You need to get moving fast. If you have the luxury of that, that a part-time CEO works totally fine. And then because like they're not a permanent CEO, it's okay if there's a wide range of possibilities. Oftentimes our experience is those people do have more corporate backgrounds. Like you find you either the people who have like startups in their blood don't do that, they go do another startup or they totally retire. It's not that often that we find great repeat startup entrepreneurs be willing to go be a part-time CEO somewhere unless they're doing it for multiple startups. So usually the people who do that are a little bit more corporate, and I think that's okay at that stage. They bring domain expertise, they bring connections, and I think that's fine. I don't have great suggestions of where to go find them. Usually our universities, when they find them, it's because they're finding alum who
Yeah,
want to come back and give back to the university and promote the ecosystem. And so mining your alumni network is a great way to find them.
absolutely. Mark, would you mind going to the second to last slide? Just
Sure.
so we have that.
Which slide is it?
This is the slide about the next webinar. Just
Oh, yes,
I'm gonna
yes,
ask you a question while we have that
yes.
slide up. So ha, you know, PIs, when at the university have received and managed, more than usually tens of millions of dollars in grants from federal and private organizations, and they successfully managed, obviously, a lot of people in that academic environment. How is that experience viewed with regards to their this past leadership experience and they're potentially being involved in let's just say C-suite, if not necessarily
Yeah.
the CEO of the company.
Yeah, it's a good question. Um, I'm going to give an answer that is honest, but I also feel a little bad about in saying that when we think about lab managerial experience and lab leadership experience in academia, we generally don't think it crosses over in the startup managerial experience that well, that they are different. And a big part of it is that the pace at which startup moves versus a lab is very different. Also, the recruiting dynamics are very different of recruiting, say, PhDs into a lab versus recruiting people in the commercial world. And so we view managing a lab more a large lab for a long period of time with a big budget, more akin to being a manager at a big corporation, and that you develop, you have the managerial orientation that's similar to that, as opposed to management in a startup. And so we're a little bit cautious about that. We could be convinced otherwise. Like with all these things, we may have an orientation or a bias, and we're looking and we'll try to express it and have, let's say in this case, the professor convince us otherwise, that the lab really is entrepreneurial, fast moving, and we absolutely can be convinced. That would be the thing you would have to do is convince us of that.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Mark. I do want to mention to our audience that we do have the second part of this series where we're going to be talking about the sourcing of CEO and C-suite talent for startup companies. I know that's of huge interest to folks as well. That panel will feature a recruiter, a talent professional from a VC firm, and a serial academic entrepreneur. We do not have a date for this, but as soon as we do, we'll be sending out an email. You'll see it on our LinkedIn as well. So we look forward to providing that. Some people have been asking the recording and the slides. Just a reminder, those will be coming to you probably within the next week, where you will have access to the recording of today's webinar and these slides as well. With that, I'd like to thank Marc Singer so much for providing all of the content today, his commentary on this really interesting area that I know is important to a lot of the folks that we work with. And thank you all for attending this webinar and sticking with us for an extra just 10 minutes or so after our allotted time. Everything that we do is usually of interest to the people that we work with, and they've been all suggestions from the people that we work with. So please do fill out that survey, as I mentioned before, because we do use that to actually have our future webinars come around and answer those subjects. So thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you again, Marc, for being a part of this.
Thanks, everybody.